Welcome to ETF Edge, your go-to place for everything exchange-traded funds. I'm your host, Bob Pisani. 2 weeks ago, BlackRock filed for a spot Bitcoin ETF. Last week, WisdomTree also filed for a spot Bitcoin ETF. That renewed interest is helping push Bitcoin over 30,000, its highest level in a year. But we know the SEC under Gary Gensler is hostile to the concept of a spot Bitcoin ETF. He's rejected every other application, so why bother filing? Let's talk with one of the principals behind one of those recent Bitcoin spot ETF filings. Jeremy Schwartz is WisdomTree Global CIO. Also joining us, Nate Geraci, who's the president of the ETF store. Jeremy, I was at a conference a few weeks ago where Gary Gensler spoke. He was actively hostile to crypto, saying it was rife with hucksters and fraudsters and scam artists. Why? Explain to us, why does WisdomTree and BlackRock believe that you guys might change Gensler's thinking about this?
Well, we are, well, thanks for having me, Bob. Appreciate being here. And Nate, glad to be on with you. I think the thing we're trying to do, we see, we've been able to successfully launch products in Europe. We've been in the market for a number of years with spot products in Europe. So the European regulators have been more friendly and they've been able to get comfortable with the mechanisms, the custodians, how the markets work. And so you go to the rejection letters, and we've faced that rejection in the past. And you say, well, can you address some of the issues the SEC points out? And one of those key issues, they've called market manipulation one of their concerns. And you say, well, why do they think there's market manipulation if they've allowed a Bitcoin futures ETF that is basically based off the same prices? But one of the key differences is the futures market has a regulated exchange that shares data and has monitoring and surveillance of the data that goes behind the futures. And so I think some of the new filings have these data sharing agreements, surveillance sharing, new ways of doing it. Now, the question is, will that address the SEC's concern on market manipulation? But that is one of the things I think we're all trying to address.
So you think you've made some tweaks. What additional tweaks to the application process have you made that really differentiate these from other applications that have been rejected? That's what I'm trying to get to right here. I'm still not quite sure what you're saying that's different that's going to make them say, oh, you've been right.
Well, I think everybody's going to have to go to the fine print, and it's hard for me to comment too much about all the details while you're in these periods. But I think the key is, will the exchanges share data and have more comfort than what was previously done before? And I think the data sharing agreements are the key element to that.
Yeah. So the basic, Gensler's basic reason for rejecting Bitcoin ETFs is the space is unregulated and it's rife with potential for fraud. He said that again 2 weeks ago. Is there some way you're getting to the heart of those concerns? I'm trying to get, how would you get him to say yes?
Well, yeah, if he's worried now, I don't think he would say Bitcoin is a fraud. Now the question is, are there activities in the pricing that the SEC would be concerned about? Is there quote unquote market manipulation that they can't monitor? Well, if they have these data share agreements that they can monitor the pricing in a way that they monitor prices on traditional regulated exchanges, maybe that is the leap that gets them more comfortable, but we shall see.
Yeah. And Nate, I want to bring you in here. You're an old ETF watcher. You're in this business. What's your take on this? Do these filings, the recent filings from BlackRock and WisdomTree, indicate something's going on here, that they know something we don't know? Why now? I still can't figure out what the differentiator is here.
Well, I think it's a good point. First of all, the timing of BlackRock's filing, I think, was certainly surprising given the current regulatory backdrop in crypto. The SEC has been extremely aggressive over the past year with essentially a regulation by enforcement approach. And there's been absolutely nothing to indicate the SEC is ready to approve a spot Bitcoin ETF. So clearly, BlackRock filing for an ETF is noteworthy. It's going to attract attention because we're talking about the world's largest asset manager. This is a firm who's obviously very well connected to government officials and regulators. And so from my perspective, it's hard to imagine BlackRock filing for a spot Bitcoin ETF on a whim without thinking they had a real shot at approval. So the question then is, well, what changed? And unlike Jeremy, I can get into the fine print just a little bit. And I think what might be the game changer here was the language in NASDAQ's 19B4 filing on this iShares ETF, which stated that NASDAQ is expecting to enter into a surveillance sharing agreement with a United States spot Bitcoin exchange. That could be the game changer, because if you think about this, the SEC and Chairman Gary Gensler have been crystal clear that they're not allowing a spot Bitcoin ETF until they have regulatory oversight of crypto exchanges, right? They've repeatedly pointed to concerns over fraud and manipulation in the underlying spot Bitcoin market as a primary reason for rejecting Bitcoin ETF applications. Well, one way to potentially overcome those concerns is for the Bitcoin ETF's listing exchange to enter into a surveillance sharing agreement with a spot crypto market that the SEC deems is of significant size. So if you look at the iShares Bitcoin ETF proposal, let's say NASDAQ is able to enter into an agreement with an exchange such as Coinbase. Theoretically, that could clear a pathway towards approval, since it would directly address the SEC's main concern.
Jeremy, do you have a similar understanding here, a surveillance sharing agreement of some kind?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, and so I think Nate's spot on there. That is, I think, hopefully the kind of advancement we want to see. We have our own versions of that, and so I think we got to see, will this be the extra hurdle? I mean, there could be other fears from the SEC on Coinbase itself. Obviously, there's the ongoing litigation there, but we work with Coinbase on our products in Europe. We're working with them on this new app that we're building, WisdomTree Prime, our custodian, and so we are, we do believe there's good progress there.
Yeah. And Jeremy, what about, well, Nate, I want to ask you, what about this argument that keeps being made that they've approved a Bitcoin futures ETF, therefore they must approve a spot Bitcoin? But it seems to me there's a difference. In the futures are a zero-sum game. You've got long and short positions that you can monitor, but with a spot Bitcoin, it's just on the blockchain, and there is no monitoring. It seems to me that's an essential difference. Maybe I'm wrong, but...
Well, really, this is the thrust of Grayscale's lawsuit. And what it boils down to is we do have CME-traded Bitcoin futures that are trading. It's a regulated market by the CFTC. But those Bitcoin futures are taking their pricing cues from the exact same exchanges that a spot Bitcoin ETF would. And so that raises the question, if those pricing cues are good enough for Bitcoin futures, why would they not be good enough for a spot Bitcoin ETF? The other thing that I think I have to mention here is it looks like tomorrow we're going to have a 2x leveraged Bitcoin futures ETF launch. This is by Volatility Shares, ticker BITX. To me, it's absurd that we're going to offer investors a 2x leveraged Bitcoin futures product before we have a very straightforward spot Bitcoin ETF. But again, this gets back. This is the thrust of the Grayscale lawsuit.
Yeah, and the other thrust is essentially Bitcoin ETFs already exist. They're just not in the U.S. There's several in Canada. We have the Purpose Bitcoin ETF. That's been around for a while. I talked to the owner there, the CEO there, a couple of years ago. They seem to trade with not many issues, but they're not addressing the unregulated nature of Bitcoin, essentially. And I mentioned there's also Bitcoin futures, but none of this has swayed the SEC. So the 2x leverage one's going to start trading tomorrow. I'm just not sure this all adds up to a reason for them to actually say yes. There is a difference between the futures and the spot, because you can monitor the open positions, right? The long and short positions. You can't really do that with a spot Bitcoin, right? I mean, that seems to be the essential difference.
But to me, that gets back into the surveillance sharing agreement, in that if we have a publicly traded company like Coinbase, who is willing to share their underlying trading data with an exchange like NASDAQ, that offers the SEC the ability to surveil here. Will that be enough? We'll see. But I would also say that BlackRock's not just in the business of filing ETFs on a whim. And I think there's some headline risk here for BlackRock going out on a limb, attempting to file for a spot Bitcoin ETF if they really felt like they had no path to approval. The other wild card that I'll mention here is last week there was a new crypto exchange that launched. It's called EDX Markets. This is backed by a consortium of companies including Citadel, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. And this exchange is intending to be a fully compliant, regulated venue in the same vein as the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. And I only point that out because if that can get enough volume, perhaps that could be the regulated market of significant size in the eyes of the SEC and get them comfortable with approving a spot Bitcoin ETF.
Yeah. You mentioned Grayscale. So Grayscale's been locked in a legal battle with the SEC about converting the Grayscale Bitcoin trust into an ETF. That's what they want. They're suing the SEC. A decision is expected, I don't know, maybe later this year. And Grayscale's already made it pretty clear they're going to convert the GBTC into an ETF as soon as it can. So Nate and Jeremy, weigh in here. What are the chances Grayscale will prevail?
Yeah, my expectation, I think there's a better chance than not that Grayscale is going to prevail in that lawsuit. If you look at the arguments, there were oral arguments made several months ago. I thought Grayscale was very compelling. And again, it gets back to treating like situations alike. And if you look at Bitcoin futures, they're taking their pricing cues from the exact same place that a spot Bitcoin ETF would take its pricing cues. What's interesting is I've been watching the discount on the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, ticker GBTC. That's shrunk to nearly 30% here recently. It was as much as about 50% at one point. That could be an indicator that the market thinks there's a growing chance, A, that Grayscale prevails, but B, that there could be a spot Bitcoin ETF approval, because that would mean there's a better chance for GBTC to convert, and that discount would get arbitraged away.
Yeah. Jeremy, you want to weigh in here on Grayscale or anything like that?
I would not want to speculate on lawsuits that are not outside our purview. But we are definitely working hard on our own on other things. And like we said, our European products work very, very well. So we think the ETF structure would be a benefit to U.S. investors, that we think the structure would add transparency that the SEC wants. So we do think it would be great to have a spot Bitcoin ETF.
Yeah, and you're not standing still here at WisdomTree, Jeremy. You're working on a Prime app. I know it's a personal finance app, I gather, that would allow people to buy and sell funds, Bitcoin, Ether, and gold. Tell us about that.
This is something we're very excited about. Over the coming weeks, it's going to be rolled out. So at WisdomTreePrime.com, there's a wait list. You'll be able to see. It'll be available to certain states before others, because we need a money transmitter license in all the different states, but we're slowly getting those on. And it'll be exciting. I mean, beyond Bitcoin and ETH, which will be available in the initial rollout, will have a cross-section of treasury funds, from tips to short-term treasuries, long-term treasuries. We'll have things like large cap stocks, technology stocks. But the key is, whereas your banking account, your checking account, they're not paying appropriate interest rates in the US, where you get 5% in short-term treasuries that you can ideally spend off of. And so there will be new features added throughout the year where you could have spending attached to something like treasuries. I mean, this is the benefits of the blockchain that we're very excited on, sort of the new building finance, the future finance, these new rails through the blockchain. The consumer won't even know it's based on the blockchain, but the underlying infrastructure will add all sorts of capabilities. We think it's a great best-in-class type structure, adding new characteristics, but merging spending with savings on top of treasuries. I'm very excited to be disrupting what I traditionally use for my own checking account. I mean, I'm excited to be able to use this for that type of feature going forward.
So do you think, I guess the question is, where do we go from here? Your application is in. How long do you think it will take to get a response from the SEC, Jeremy?
I've known not to speculate on this topic. As much as we know, I really can't say I have any clarity on what it's going to take and how quickly we will.
Understood. Nate, what about you? How long do you think it'll take to get a response?
I'm not going to speculate on that, but here's what I will say. It's my belief that the SEC should approve all of these at the same time, and when they get comfortable with it, and let investors decide who the winners are. I think it's important to recognize that firms such as WisdomTree and Bitwise and Grayscale, they have been pursuing this product for years. They put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into this. And it would seem a bit unfair to me if iShares gets first to market. Absolutely.
So how many of them are out there? 30 or so? I don't know. There's still some out in front of them, but it would be a little awkward if suddenly, if they actually convinced them, WisdomTree or BlackRock, and suddenly said, okay, BlackRock can go ahead, and they didn't approve the other one. It would be a little awkward, wouldn't it? Or maybe they can say, well, this is a different structure. Maybe what you were talking about, the surveillance mechanism, would make the difference, and they'd have to go back and cure the defects in the prior applications.
Yeah, if the argument is that BlackRock figured out how to get a surveillance sharing agreement in place with an exchange such as Coinbase, I get that. But I also think the SEC needs to be aware of the poor overall optics if they were to approve the iShares Bitcoin ETF ahead of others.